You have to make this affordable, achievable, and of course, implantable at isolated communities. Track and Reef Lab Designs are testing the future by reverse engineering traditional 3D prints of reefs to rehabilitate the damage on Pompon Island. During this presentation, the first findings of these artificial reef structures will be shared with the public on how these units hold up with extreme conditions. Yeah. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite Robin Filippo. The stage is yours, my friend.
All right,
Thank
guys.
you.
Can everyone hear me all right? Sounds okay? All right. So, welcome all to my part of the presentation, closing of the show. So, I'll be talking today about from rubble to reef, rehabilitating sloping reefs after blast fishing using a 3D printer without a printer inside. I know that that's a big mouthful, right? But today, basically, we're going to highlight about a very difficult environment that we have on Pompom Island, East Coast Sabah, and what we can do to actually recover some of these reefs that are there. So, first of all, what is 3D printing? The action or process of making a physical object from a three-dimensional digital model, typically by laying down many thin layers of material in succession. So can I get hands up? Who has got experience with 3D printing? Or heard of it, knows anything about it? One person. No one knows about 3D printing. Everyone has been living under a rock? Oh, okay, so 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there's a few more people that know about 3D printing then. 3D printing is something that is a very magnificent kind of action that is taking place currently, where you can achieve things that previously were not, deemed possible even. Particularly when we look at some of the shapes that we have there on the right side. If you look at that intrinsity of it, it's the size of a fist. But yet that there's the size of a fish, you can have all of these small little holes, and you can do it over and over again. The same thing that you can create every single time will just be recreated over and over and over again, exactly the same. And that's the thing that's a beautiful part. Where is the... Guys? Okay. Why is this thing not working, huh? They're going back? Okay. Yes. All right. So, for those that don't know, so my name is Robin and I'm the director of the Tropical Research and Conservation Center in Borneo. So we are doing artificial reef building already for the past decade. That has been like my specialty. That's something that we've been focusing on for a long time. And what we are trying to find is a solution for a very difficult environment. The very first part that we started with 3D printed reefs and why that is actually something that came to my attention is because of a guy in Australia, Alex Gott, who is from Reef Design Lab. And he liked one of my photos from his company called Reef Design Lab. If you're a bit of a person who likes to work inside of conservation and you're doing restoration and something that comes up with reef design and lab, like a laboratorium, it does not make sense. That should not be in one sentence together, right? So it went into a deep dive, and during this conversation that we had, we were supposed to meet up just for a coffee at 10 a.m., which ended up with a conversation for many hours about artificial reefs, about how this is something that is going to be the future. And that got me into this, Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole, trying to figure out, okay, where is 3D printing actually at the moment standing worldwide? And what I found is that there's a really innovative sphere that's going on. All of these structures that we have here are printed from 3D structures, so 3D printers. So there's many big projects, and particularly here is the middle is printed for the Prince of Albert of Monaco. So it's like an honorary kind of reef that he got printed for him, which is amazing, and it's quite big if you particularly look at the size of the divers, or they're over on the right side. It's massive, right? So there's a lot of these projects that are happening right now, but there's not really much into the grassroots organizations. And why is that? because there's a couple of reasons. So I wanted to really figure out what is happening right now and why is this not being embraced yet by many organizations. Okay, let's see if this works this time. Okay. Where do you want me to point it at? No. Yes. No. One back. Is this thing just not happening? One back? Okay. So there's 4 different reasons why there's a delay in implementation. Because if we look at 3D printing on its own, and there's a large amount of like artificial reef structures that are going on with this, if this is really the future of artificial reef building, why is this not implemented in such a large scale? And there's 4 particular reasons. The very first one, it's extremely expensive equipment. Some of these printers that we are here for industrial size printers start at around about $150,000 US. And this is before tariffs. So most likely now it will probably be a lot more expensive than that. And the printers, particularly like the robot arms that are there, they go up all the way to more than $1 million US. So these are like huge amounts, right? Like we would not be able to afford something like that. That's a really high number for a grassroots organization that's there. Is this honestly? Okay, second part is that there's so much research and development that goes on with this. When we are looking with an organization that's in Australia, so it's called Reef Design Lab, for every hour, minimum wage is around about 70, 75 ringgit per hour. Before you can design something like this, and it goes into like a program which is called CAD, then they are just making the design over and over and over again. Before you actually come to your very first print that you are doing, you're already looking at hundreds, if not thousands of dollars before the very first structure is actually being printed at the end. And then once that is being done, if you have a printer of $1 million US and you're trying to print something, you need to sit there the whole time that it goes. Because if something goes wrong with that printer, you can throw away that money, right? So, can we go to the next one? Then the third one is a huge one, logistics. So anyone who's been doing artificial reef building knows that when you're trying to have a structure and you're putting it on the water, it involves lift bags, it involves a lot of divers. When we are having huge reefs like this, here on the bottom left side, you can see these units are 3,000 kilos for one unit. If you want to put that somewhere onto a sloping reef or onto a reef in general, first of all, that's going to cost a ton of money again. To have a boat with a crane on it, in Malaysia is around about $60,000 for one day. If you have bad weather on that day, it's gonna go into nothingness. If you are only able to then deploy, let's say 10 units, you're already looking at 6,000 ringgit purely for nothing but the boat. And that's just the boat. If we are turning this even further around, and we are having these reefs, and they're coming, for example, from Australia, where they're being printed, when they're being printed there, they go onto a trolley, the trolley goes onto the truck goes to the harbor, onto a container, onto a boat, and then we're still in Melbourne. And then it takes a very long time before it even gets to Kuala Lumpur. So the size and the weight of these things make it nearly impossible for any large structure to really be implemented onto a large scale without it being financially extremely expensive. Can you go to the next one? So that brings us to the fourth point and the final point, basically. It will never ever be financially available for conservation. Like, we are on an island that's 2.3 kilometers circumference. We're right next to the beach. There's such a high salt level there. Even for us, stainless steel still rusts because there's everywhere still salt in it. So we cannot have anything that is that nice because it is just unachievable. So whenever there's grassroots organizations that don't have massive funding, whether it's from sultans or from governments or from European Union, whatever it might be, if you don't have that behind you, we would never be able to implement that. Go to the next one. So, if we are looking at this and we are taking some of these things away, so if we can look at the biggest problems that we have and we can take this away, so if we can bring down the cost per reef, if we can make the logistics, we can just make that eliminated. We can do diver deployment in that. We can do it with nothing but a dive boat. Then we are looking at something that would be actually the future for artificial reef building, because you can make something over and over and over again without there actually being a problem with the reefs not looking the same, for example. Okay. So, before we go to the solution, we first want to talk about the problem, right? Can I see hands up? Who has heard about blast fishing? Don't be shy. You can put your hand up. Just want to make sure that people actually understand what it is. Thank you. So blast fishing is a very destructive method of fishing that is currently happening today, particularly in East Malaysia. The action that it actually takes is there is like a glass or a plastic bottle that is being filled with fertilizer and a diffuser, and this is then used in order to go fishing. But this is not something that is new. This is something that is even backdating to 1893, the very first documentation of blast fishing that happened. So this is not a new thing that was happening or that's occurring. But the sad thing is, to this day, this is still happening in Malaysia. To this day, this is still happening on many occasions that blast fishing is taking place. It's definitely getting better to what it was, but it's still happening. And the destruction that takes place in that case is one bomb can destroy up to 15 meters diameter. 15 meters. So it's basically almost the size of this whole stage that is being destroyed by one blast. Keep in mind, like this is from people that are having destitution, right? They don't have another solution to do this. So we cannot point the finger and say that this is the blame. But it is a problem that it is destroying the reef still to this day that we have on Pom Pom and all over Asia. But there's an issue that comes with this. The problem that we have is that blast fishing is not something that is only happening on Pom Pom or used to happen in Pom Pom. This is something that has been happening in Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, the whole Coral Triangle, but it doesn't stop there. This is something that is happening still into many places in West Africa, East Africa, around India, around Sri Lanka, in the Gulf even where it's happening. All over the world, this is something that has been happening. But the problem that is with the blast fishing is that there is so much destruction that happens and there's no recovery taking place. So I've been on Pom Pom Island for the past 10 years. In these 10 years, this is what I'm looking at. This is the reefs that we are looking at. And this is not me just trying to take like a couple of photos randomly or like specifically like, oh, let's go and look for a site that looks destroyed. This is actually something that is very like prevalent there. We've got only about 5% coral cover on Pom Pom. So, because there's such a high slope on it, it means that there's also no recovery able to take place. On Pom Pom, we don't have an issue with coral growth. We don't have an issue with recruitment. There's so much coral growing left, right, and center. But it doesn't have a place to grow. It doesn't have a stable substrate. Like I'm standing on this stage, it's quite stable. But if I would now be standing on sand and I'm trying to climb up this table, it will probably fall. That's the same as with coral. So there is such a steep slope, anywhere from 15 to 45 degrees angles. And when the coral recruitment starts to settle on there, it grows onto something that is very small. When it starts to grow bigger on the slope, it starts to tumble down. When it starts to tumble down, it gets smothered by other coral. It is basically the slope of death. So we see that this coral, even though there's a lot of growth to it, it doesn't have a place to actually stably grow on. So it creates underwater landslides, which eventually leads to the fact that there's no natural recovery taking place and human intervention is necessary. And this is something that we've been working on for the past 10 years to try and find a solution. Because as we look worldwide, there's around about 600,000 square kilometers of reef. But there's two things in my coral career that I've always been told. One, if it's deeper than 10 meters, it's not optimal. So probably don't do it. And then secondly, if it's more than 15 degrees inclination or slope, don't even think about it because it's not going to work. So we don't have a stable substrate at all on pom-pom. But if we are choosing to ignore these facts, we're having 600,000 square kilometers. Let's say about 20% of that is still sloping reefs. If we are ignoring anything that is more than 15 degrees slopes, let's say this is going to get worse, right? Weather events are going to continue and going to get worse. I'll touch more base on that later on. But if this is going to get worse, what we have in pom-pom is not something that is unique. This is something that might start to happen in more places as these weather events are going to get worse. So now that we've spoken about, you know, the 3D printing, we've spoken about the potential, the problems that are there, of course we need to come to the solutions as well, because I think that that's what the most people are interested in. So first I want to introduce Reef Design Lab, which are guys that are in Melbourne that are really working on pushing boundaries when it comes to engineering and design. So they are designing reefs in order to try and figure out how restoration will be able to take place. So what they have done is they turn around the concept of traditional 3D printing by reversing it. So instead of that, they print one massive unit. It's the very first place that they do. What they do is they turn it around. So they are creating modular systems. With a modular system that they create, that they can create the largest structure so far, which is here on the right, which they just deploy with nothing but a dive boat. And that is something that is already pushing boundaries. And then they just connect it underwater to ensure that they can create these 3D structures and still have a really good base and everything in place. So when I met Alex, we sat down and he told me about the fact that there is already like a second part that he's working on, which is called basically the MARS, the Modular Artificial Reef System, Part 2. With this, he is working on this and he's been asking me for some questions. It's like, okay, so what would work, what wouldn't work? Because I'm looking very selfishly from a perspective of inclination going down, what works on slopes and what doesn't work. So we spoke about this for ages and we said just like, okay, how can we turn this, how can we bring this to the island? We cannot bring a printer to pom-pom because that doesn't make sense, because we can't afford it for all of the logical reasons that are there. But I still want to help. So we said, let's talk about the facts, what we need from a restoration perspective. So we want to have like a lower height distribution. Because on a slope, if we're going to build a pyramid there, obviously it will tumble. So we need to film a lower end on that one. Secondly, we want to have a large surface area because we've got so much coral recruitment going on, but they don't have a place to grow on. So if we now have a place that they can grow on, that means that we don't actually have to do coral restoration potentially, because it will automatically do. So if we provide the substrate, nature will recover, so to speak. And then lastly, we wanted to have like the grooves instead of the holes, because when we have grooves, it creates a sort of micro eddy where there's more food availability for coral to grow, but also for coral to recruit on. So and these are the structures that we have done, and I'll show you the video if it works, of what the mold actually looks like. So we are turning around the idea of that you need to have a 3D printer. We just created 3D printed molds. So the molds is actually the only thing that we now need on the island. So we are on the island making all of these artificial reefs, making all of these units with nothing but pouring cement inside of a mold. So we're using this really high-end technology. We're using this really high-end technology, which is 3D printing, but we don't need a printer at all. So we are actually doing all of this on the island. So if you go into Sabah and you go to any of the local communities and you ask them like, hey, guys, do you know how to control a 3D printer? You're not going to get anyone that knows. Like you guys, you don't know what a 3D printer is, from some of you apparently. But if you ask them, can you mix cement? Everyone will raise their hand and say, yeah, of course. What do you want me to build you? A house, a jacuzzi, like a villa? This is their second nature. So we wanted to use this high-end technology that is 3D printing, and we break that down to the simplicity of, can you mix cement? If you can mix cement, you can make 3D printed reefs. If you can make these 3D printed reefs, it's like Lego. So I think there's a video. Can you turn the sound off of the video, if that's possible? Oh. Come on back. Yeah. Yeah, no sound, but just play the video if that's okay. Okay, so this is patient 0, which is the very first installation that we've deployed on PomPom on the 30th of July. I'll just wait for a second. So this is an installation that we've placed on the 30th of July last year with 4 divers, 1 dive boat, and just a couple of bolts and screws. In one dive, a 70-minute dive, we've managed to deploy this. And the very first thing is as well, this is more than half a ton installation. This is a 525 kilo installation that we've managed to deploy on a 25-degree slope. Now, 10 months after we've deployed it, it is still in the same location, exactly in the same location. It has not moved for a single centimeter, which is something that if we are now looking at a potential solution to restore these reefs, that is actually like pretty groundbreaking potentially to be able to have a recovery that takes place. And what we see is that after these 10 months, and Daniel, the science officer, who's just sitting here as well, he's been helping with the deployment and with all of the data collection. What we see is that there's, in 10 months' time, 288 natural recruits that have been taking place. So we see that there's a coral that actually starts to settle and grow on there already, which is massive, and that's huge. And then on top of that, we see an 84% abundance increase. So that's massive. So in a very short amount of time, where there's nothing but death and decay, we can put a reef down there, and then we see a massive increasement in less than a year. Then on top of that, when we look at the species, so the amount of different types of fish that we have, right? At the very first part, what it is, there were only 19 different species of fish that were recorded on the first surveys. Now in the last survey that was done 10 months later, we're looking at 51 species, which is an increase of 286%. in less than a year. That's massive. This is groundbreaking, right? This is massive results that are coming out of this. So what we are trying to do now is we're trying to go to the next one. Yeah. So what we are now trying to do is we found then basically this sort of solution, right? So we've got now, instead of using a 3D printer, we just 3D print the molds. The 3D printed molds we have on the island, and we can use nothing but cement and sand, which is cheap materials, to make this high-end technology that we can then implement. But before we are looking at doing this in a larger scale, we need to know from a scientific perspective that this works. So for the upcoming 3 to 5 years, we want to be looking at what does it do, how does this work, and what are the results of it. These initial results that we see within 10 months is massive. That's really big. Like 84% biodiversity, abundance increase, biodiversity increase. Like that's huge already on itself. But we now want to see that scientifically speaking, this is the right path that we have. So now what we want to do, because all of this has been done without any coral planting. Now these installations that we've put down, which is, hopefully it works, yeah. So this is what our volunteers do on the island. We are having these installations that are being put down, which is like really like an art kind of installation. And we're having volunteers that are planting coral on this as well. So we're having an outplant of coral to speed up the process of how quick this is going to come back. So the research that's going to be starting next week is a research to be trying to figure out which of the 3 planting methods are going to be working best. Whether that's wet cementing, super glue, or 2-part epoxy. If this is all going to go forward, hopefully we will be having a good connection with the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia and the Queensland University of Technology in Australia. And then we will be collaborating to try and figure out from a holistic approach, is this something that will be like potentially as the future of coral restoration? Because there's just a lot more, art almost to it. It's like putting the art back in artificial reefs. Because any one of you guys that's a diver and you go diving and you see artificial reefs, particularly if they're cement, you see this is something that is an artificial reef, and most of the time doesn't really look very nice, right? So that's something from an aesthetic standpoint, we are trying to bring this smart deck as well. So if this research project is actually going to come to fruition, and it's going to be showing the actual results in terms of like what we have been trying to push for, we can see some massive, massive results. Because if we are able to provide a new substrate and the fish come back and the diversity comes back and the species come back, and we can do this on a slope, that is something that has not been done before. In any of the scientific literature that's out there right now, there is no restoration that is, peer-reviewed above 15 degrees sloping reefs. So we are having a massive gap in what needs to happen and what we are trying to provide, so to speak. And, without sounding too much doom and gloom, but unfortunately the weather events are becoming worse, right? Like I've been talking a lot with people from Kuala Lumpur that it's not been raining this couple of weeks. We are in Sabah and we are having the most insane rain that we've had in years. This is going to become worse and worse. If this is going to continue, what we have in Pompom might be in anticipation of what's going to come. Because when we have bleaching events that are getting worse, when we're going to have the hotter climate, we're going to have more tourism that's going to take place, more development, and we're having all of these sloping reefs. And if that dies, where's that going to go? Where's the dead coral going to go at that stage, right? It starts to tumble down. So what we have in Pompom is hopefully not, but it might be in anticipation of what's going to happen worldwide if these weather events are going to get worse. So we need to find a solution. We need to come up with a solution of this. So I think what we've tried to speak about as well is, the reason why there is the blast fishing that has been taking place, particularly in Southeast Asia or in Sabah, is because of a level of destitution, because of marginalized communities. So the people that are not being recognized by governments, they are going to destructive fishing practices. So what we are trying to do with Trek is by the creation of these 3D printed reefs, we are wanting to have the local community actually making these reefs. So when we are going to be able to employ the local community to be building these, to be deploying these, to do the maintenance on it, to put it all down into the ocean, and it will bring back their fish and whatever, it means that they are going to have a higher availability of fish for them to continue with their traditional ways of living, which is like really on the sea, which is going around and just catching their own. So if we are able to provide them with an alternative source of income, which takes them away from doing illegal practices like blast fishing, and that money that they will be earning from making these artificial reefs, and that can then be pushed back into the community, we're trying to look at an holistic approach to make sure that these people will have a livelihood, so that the stateless people, the Bajau Laut, will be having these next steps going forward. And that's what we're really trying to achieve. So, without having much training, because anyone who can mix cement and we can pour it inside of a mold, you can make these artificial reefs. And because this is like a Lego formation, you can build these blocks like Lego. So anyone that is able to have this, we can also make these reefs and restore their own reefs. So there will not be much training required to do these things. And I think that that's a key part. If we have limited amount of training that is necessary, and we can have the regular divers that are able to be joining this, we can start to do like a massive operation if the scientific evidence is showing that this is a solution. Because if this is not going to come back positive, we shouldn't be mass implementing this in any formal way. So we have a lot of opportunities for funders or for local divers to have with minimal funding to be joining in this and to do the restoration and to restore a lot of the artificial reefs like worldwide. Okay, so to get back onto a final note, so to speak, I believe that 3D printing is definitely on the verge of a breakout. There's internationally speaking so many projects that are doing this, so many projects that are currently working on 3D printing, but I hope that they will start to take note and that they make the molds so we can do this on site, so that there's not the logistics, the carbon footprints that come with this of getting something from, for example, Melbourne to go to Saudi Arabia to be installed there. Like there's such a big print on it with all of that kind of, the ships and the barges that it goes to the other side of the world. Research needs to be done though. If we do not have the scientific research to push that this is, or to prove that this is actually like a solution, then we shouldn't be doing this. So we need to do a lot more research that this actually makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, we need to continue to go to where the wheel might be. Not reinvent the wheel, finalize the wheel, however you want to talk to it. I think that when we are, looking at what the solution or what the future is going to bring, what we are trying to do is we're trying to push. So now the first reefs are being installed already last week on 30-degree slopes. Anyone that does restoration, that's a significant incline. In the coming weeks, we're going to be pushing that all the way up to 45 degrees. Why? Because if we don't try it, who else is going to try it? So we need to try and push to try and see if this change will actually work. If this works, we might have a solution to try and restore historical blast fishing practices and restore the reefs that are there in this kind of sense. And then the potentials are endless. I think that's the main key. Like, there's so much innovation that goes on. If we can really push for this innovation, there will be like a lot more change possible. All right, so I've got one more final video, and then I've got one more, kind of shout out to Alex and Zach from Reef Design Lab. Their staff are making this possible, and they're the ones that are supporting us massively so that we can do the work. Give these guys a follow. Give Track, our organization, a follow as well. We will be reachable. If anyone has any questions as well, you can also go out. And else, I want to, thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all luck in the lucky draw. Is there anyone with questions? Anyone has a question? Okay. Any questions? No questions? Okay, thank you very much, guys. Good luck.
All right, thank you very much. And that was the last presentation on stage, which is brought to you by Robin Filippo. Right, the moment we've been waiting for. What's next? Wow, you guys all waiting for me to come up, huh? Right, today is the last day of the show in conjunction with the 19th Malaysian International Dive Expo 2025. Are you guys ready for Lucky Draw? All right. Do you know how many prizes are there today? Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's above 10. 35, no? No? Higher? Lower? Lower? 20 higher? 22 correct. Hey, where did that come from? All right, so just hang in a moment. I'd like to invite Mr. Kenny on stage. Could I have Mr. Kennedy on stage, please? Thank you. Lucky draw time. Stand by.